Hello and welcome to the channel. So March is Women's History Month, and since it's hard enough to find a movie that passes the Bechdel test, and since most conversations about who the canonical GOATs are in the world of film directing tend to exclude women, I wanted to use this as an opportunity to highlight 10 female-directed movies that I love and think are special and think that you should check out. So without further ado, I'm going to get through this as briefly as I can. I am not ranking these movies from worst to best or anything like that, and to hold myself to that, I am talking about these movies alphabetically. So let's get into it. First up, we have Aftersun, directed by Charlotte Wells. This is a movie about a father and daughter on vacation with each other in Turkey, and it's basically just a movie that sort of explores their relationship and sort of examines kind of this young girl kind of trying to come to terms with who her father is. This is a very special movie for a couple of reasons. For one, it sort of feels like it creates its own genre in terms of how it splices together sort of traditional narrative filmmaking with these 90s VHS home videos, and feels like it sort of creates its own genre. There's one shot in particular that goes on for a few minutes where the movie films the daughter filming her dad on this VHS tape that she's carrying around, and it's so visually and thematically layered that I honestly think that any film student should study just that shot by itself. On top of that, everything from the directing, particularly these sort of asymmetrical close-up shots and compositions, the editing, the structure, the performances, like, create this very palpable sense of unease that just kind of kept me very engrossed in the movie the whole time I was watching it, and kind of made me feel like I had a real sort of window into this, father and daughter's relationship. Finally, it has what I think is one of the most haunting needle drops in history. I'm not even going to say what song it is or what the needle drop is, because if you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. And if you haven't seen it, then you should watch it. Next up, we have American Psycho, directed by Mary Herron. Ironically enough, a couple of the movies on this list are movies that fall squarely in the film bro canon, which makes sense since I am myself a film bro. And also, ironically enough, and I could be wrong about this, who knows, but I don't know if this movie would work as well as it does without a woman's perspective. I rewatched it somewhat recently, and I was just very struck by how hilarious and deranged it is, and how every detail really feels like it sort of works in service of creating this deranged, fantastical world that exists in the mind of this Wall Street financial elitist, and one could argue the sort of psyche of the American political and economic elite. It's really a great movie, and I think one of the defining pieces of satire in film. Next up, we have Beau Travail, directed by Claire Denis. This is a movie about a group of men, or a platoon, I guess, who are serving in the French Foreign Legion. I just watched this recently for the first time, and it has already cemented itself as one of my favorite movies of all time. After watching it, I watched the Greta Gerwig Criterion Channel interview where she talked about this movie, and she articulated exactly how I felt about it, which is that I think its brilliance lies in the fact that it is sort of expressing things and doing things that are unique to the medium of film. This lies in its directing, its editing, and its matching of image with music. So with that being said, I'm not going to say anything more about it. I'm just going to say that it is dreamlike, it's sublime, and it has one of the most haunting endings that I've seen in any movie. Next up, we have The Matrix, directed by Lena and Lily Wachowski. You know, it feels like we live in a time where we're sort of converging on this point where all movies that are going to be made in the future are either going to be independent movies that cost $10, maybe $20 million to make, if not way less, or sort of these $200 million IP studio monstrosities that are written and created by guys who work in private equity. All of that is to say that it feels like the era of big budget auteur filmmaking is dead. And I think that in the future, we're going to look back and we're going to realize that The Matrix was one of the last sort of big budget movies with an auteur vision. And I think that we should count ourselves lucky, because even watching it in 2025, it still feels original, it still feels exciting, it still feels new, and it feels emblematic of what you can truly accomplish with a lot of resources and a huge canvas and an unlimited imagination. God bless the Wachowskis. Next up, we have Mikey and Nicky, directed by Elaine May. This is a film starring John Cassavetes as Nicky and Peter Falk as Mikey, and they play two gangsters in very sort of against type roles. At the start of the movie, we see John Cassavetes' character sort of holed up in this hotel room with a crooked cigarette dangling from his mouth, his eyes swollen from sleep deprivation, and he calls his friend to come help him out. What follows is a manic one-night odyssey through the heart of New York City, which sort of puts it in the same canon as movies like After Hours, Good Time, and it just does an incredible job of doing this thing that I really love in a lot of my favorite movies, which is sort of threading the line between kind of realism and absurdity, and it kind of walks that tightrope very well. John Cassavetes himself was known for being a sort of an actor's director, in the sense that he was just really good at producing really incredible results from his actors. And you can learn a lot about acting just from kind of watching his movies and watching the choices that his actors made, and, you know, because of the freedom that he gave them to do that. Here, he's an actor being directed, and I think that Elaine May proves herself to be just as skilled in producing results that are just as electrifying. This movie is a masterclass in writing, directing, acting, and the fact that Elaine May really had to fight the studio for the final cut, and it sort of put her in director's jail for a decade after it was released, is a travesty. Next up, we have The Power of the Dog, directed by Jane Campion. If I'm choosing a Jane Campion movie, the obvious choice might seem like The Piano, and I think that movie could just as easily fall on this list. But for me, The Power of the Dog is a personal favorite of mine, of her movies. I think that here, her strengths as a filmmaker are just on full display. Perfect example of her telling a story about these people who are involved in these very complex relationships and sort of expressing what's going on with their inner emotions through what we see on screen. And for that reason, I think it's great, and I just love this movie. Next up, we have Lynn Ramsey's incredible debut film Ratcather, which is a movie about a young boy growing up in 1970s Glasgow, Scotland. To me, what really sort of defines the brilliance, or one of the things that defines the brilliance of this movie, is how it sort of threads the line between this sort of kitchen sink realism and some very poetic visuals that really capture sort of the subjective experience of the movie's young protagonist. There are a lot of big sort of social developments happening in this movie, including a sanitation workers strike that's kind of going on in the background, as well as just kind of this general backdrop of poverty. And I just think this is a beautiful movie that brilliantly captures the experience of not just growing up in 1970s Scotland, but growing up in general. Next up, we have Julia Ducournau's Titane, which is another movie that I've reviewed on the channel along with The Power of the Dog. This is another great movie that sort of threads this line between... It feels very human, but very inhuman at the same time. And I think that is where its brilliance lies, is that sort of dichotomy. There's a lot of dichotomies on this list I'm now noticing. It's realistic, but it's absurd. It's realistic, but it's poetic. It's human, but it's inhuman. I mean, whatever. I think that movies that are sort of paradoxical in nature tend to be sort of the most tonally and thematically interesting, but I digress. Point is, Titane is, I think, sublime, disturbing, beautiful, and has really sort of drilled itself into the base of my skull since I first saw it. Next up, we have Kelly Reichardt's Wanda and Lucy. I'm going to be honest, I haven't seen any of Reichardt's movies up until recently, despite her being one of the most celebrated independent filmmakers of her generation. But watching this definitely made me want to dive into the rest of her body of work. This is a movie about a woman named Wanda, played by Michelle Williams, who is living out of her car with her dog, Lucy, and they are driving to Alaska seeking better economic opportunity. I knew that Reichardt's movies were very slow-paced, very quiet, but I didn't know that they were so beautiful. The photography in this is just gorgeous, and the way that she captures the Midwest, the Pacific Northwest, especially sort of working class areas of it, I think are really worth studying. Not only that, this is one of the better movies that I've seen in terms of how it depicts economic precarity and what it really looks like. It reminded me of the miniseries Made in that sense. And yeah, this is just a very beautiful, but also like very heartbreaking movie. If you're, worried about what's going to happen between this woman and her dog, I would just say it's, not for the faint of heart. It's pretty harrowing stuff, but I think it's a beautiful movie. And if The Matrix is a case study in what you can accomplish with a lot of resources, I think this is a case study in what you can accomplish with very little resources. And finally, we have The Watermelon Woman, directed by Cheryl Dunye. The 1990s was a decade of film that saw a lot of movies sort of redefining the form, and a lot of sort of independent movies that were bringing fresh, new, exciting ideas and perspectives. Think Tarantino's Pulp Fiction, that's probably the most famous example. Richard Linklater's Slacker, Soderbergh's Sex, Lies, and Videotape. And in my opinion, this movie sort of belongs to that tradition. This is a movie about a young, aspiring filmmaker who's played by Cheryl Dunye, who's playing sort of a fictionalized version of herself. And she discovers this early 20th century black actress and sort of tries to investigate her biographical life story and try to understand her as a way of also understanding, more about the history of black people in American film. And it does it with this, very clever sort of mixture of narrative filmmaking as well as mockumentary filmmaking that I think is so clever in terms of what it does for form. This is a style of filmmaking that Dunye herself called Dunye-mentary. And yeah, I really like the fact that we're sort of bookending this list with two movies between this and Aftersun, both being movies that sort of created their own genres. The Watermelon Woman is sweet, it's poignant, it's funny, it's inventive, and it does a lot for queer representation in film, which is really nice. And that's it. Those are my 10 female-directed film picks. Please comment down below. Let me know what your favorite female-directed movies are. There are some movies here that didn't quite make the cut, like Clueless, Near Dark, Selma, One Night in Miami. There are also, I haven't even scratched the surface with some of the filmmakers that I've talked about here, like Denis and Reichardt. So, or Lynn Ramsey, I haven't watched any of her other movies, so this is a great catalyst for me to sort of dive into their body of works. There are other filmmakers that I haven't even seen, like Agnes and Chantal Ackerman, so who knows? Maybe that's for another video next March, next year. But until then, take care.